Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with serial entrepreneur and CEO of Fiddlehead, Melinda Byerley. She is the leader of a seven-figure consultancy she founded virtually from her San Francisco home in 2014. She is a pioneer of growth marketing in Silicon Valley, where she's held B2B and B2C marketing and e-commerce leadership roles at companies such as PlantSense, eBay, PayPal, and Checkpoint Software. Her professional specialties are marketing analytics and a holistic approach to customer-centered marketing. From our base in San Jose, we cover some solid ground. Enjoy.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, it's great to meet you. And before we get into your life and your career, I'd like to know, first and foremost, 4 years ago, we were dealing with this pandemic. It was raging. We didn't know what was going to happen, how we were going to get out of it. How did you ultimately survive that pandemic period? And how did it change the way that you go about your life as an entrepreneur and CEO?
Well, it was, oddly enough, as much suffering as there was, and my home situation was actually quite complicated at the time. We were living with my mother-in-law to help take care of her. So that, I love my mother-in-law, but it's complicated. But the thing is, my business was going gangbusters. Oddly enough, I was sort of counter-cyclical, I think because we had been remote prior to the pandemic. We had always been a remote-first company. And so when companies needed support, they knew to come to us. We already knew how to work remotely. We already had people situated. We knew, what to do so we could react quickly. And so we grew like crazy. And so I spent most of my pandemic working my butt off, very much like making hay while the sun shines. But I also think, as part of my own work, I also have my own podcast, and I interviewed Tom Peters. And it's probably one of my favorite podcasts, and I talked to him about leading through crisis. And it really just underscored, it did not change me as an entrepreneur so much as underscore what I have always believed in, which is people first. And, if you take care of people, especially in the service business, they take care of you. And so I think, we managed to keep our team intact. We managed to not lose anybody, whether they're to COVID or to have turnover, for a very long time when there was a lot of turnover in the service business. And so I think those decisions have only been underscored. I think the aftermath of the pandemic has actually, in many ways, been more volatile and unpredictable than what happened in the pandemic itself, at least for me personally.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that there's a level of everything that we're still so close to that time period to pull away from it and really see what it did. I totally agree. But it's interesting. So you got your guest, a high-powered guest during the pandemic. Did it help that things had slowed down to get good guests on your show?
No, I think, one, I actually didn't do as many shows as I should have because I was working so hard. Shoemakers' kids never have any shoes in the marketing business. But, I think, again, it was easier to talk to people, but in some ways nobody wanted to talk because everybody was on Zoom all day. And what I found, one of the things that I found as an entrepreneur that I had to do during pandemic was I started taking at least Friday afternoons off, because the Zoom situation was very tiring. And it almost felt like dog days, like the days felt longer and harder. And so I often would just stop at either Friday at noon or even all day Friday and try to rest. And take breaks from it, because the research I read about how unusual it was to sit and stare into a screen, and because the meetings went from 3 or 4 hours a day to 6, 8, 10 hours a day, and it was exhausting. So in that sense, I think I became more aware of self-care and the importance of stepping back, for sure.
Talk to me a little bit about, if I put you in front of a bunch of third graders, mm-hmm. and they really wanted to know what you do on a daily basis, really wanted to needle into exactly what your career is, how would you answer them? What would you say to them? Well, it's funny. I often have to explain to people what I do, because often what we do is not something, people spend their time in. But what I say is, you see all the advertisements online, you see ads for cars or for Apple or for blue jeans or what have you, and they say yes. And I say, well, some businesses spend money on that, and it costs money. And one of the things a business has to understand is, if I spend $1, will I make at least $1? And if not, $2. And my job is to figure that out, is to figure out whether the money that they spent on those ads actually made money for the company. Usually then they're ready to go off and play. So what did you want to be in the third grade? What was your dream to grow up and become?
I wanted to be an astronaut and the first woman president of the United States.
Take me back to the beginnings of your life, and how did you evolve into this role of being an entrepreneur and being so business savvy?
Thank you very much for the compliment. It is not a natural position for my family. My family are hardworking, truly working class people. There are no entrepreneurs in my family. Nobody could afford to take that kind of risk. My stepfather worked on the line at Chrysler. I was an auto worker and a guy who could fix anything. My mom was a nurse in a nursing home, changing, bedpans and caring for the elderly. My parents worked really hard. I had to take out student loans to go to college. I actually studied theater. That's a long and sort of, winding road out of the Midwest. But my parents were very clear about two things. One was that, my stepfather was very aware that the jobs in the plants wouldn't still be there for me. Automation was coming quickly. I was a child of the 80s. Lee Iacocca's books were in the house, and, jobs were rapidly going away. And my parents were very clear-eyed about, you have to get out of here. You have to get an education, and you have to get out of here because there won't be jobs. And I think at great sacrifice, they worked really hard to make sure that I had those opportunities. I don't know how thrilled they were that when I used them to study theater, maybe not medicine or accounting, but ultimately, my theater degree, and actually worked backstage, taught me a lot about two things that I think are really important in business. One is teamwork. It is the only truly collaborative art form. And the second is deadlines, because opening night is immutable. It can't be pushed back. And so you learn to make trade-offs in order to be ready to go. So I think those are two things that sort of helped me as I transitioned into business. It wasn't until after I'd worked in the Valley for well over a decade that I felt like I had enough experience and enough capital, both social, professional, financial capital, that I could take the leap. And it was really seeing other people do it and being encouraged by other people to do it. I took classes in entrepreneurship and business school, but ultimately thought, well, that's for rich people. That's not for me. And then after a while, it became very obvious that this was the right path for me, and I'm glad I did it. But I was definitely a late bloomer.
Who's a hero for you? Who's been an inspiration for you in your career?
Well, certainly my parents. I know everybody says that, but truly, it's easy to look at around, ourselves in the Bay Area, for example, and complain. And all I do is just stop and think about how hard my parents worked. Double shifts. I remember, if Christmas fell on a Sunday and Dad could get triple time, you'd have Christmas the day after. And so I never forget how lucky I am to do what I do. And so so it always, first and foremost, just starts with the example my parents set and what they taught me about hard work. It will get you many places, and it's almost more important than education. Hard work and good values. I'm going to say good Midwestern values, although good values are everywhere. And I would say, when I was younger, I was very inspired by Nelson Mandela, 27 years in prison for what he believed in, and what he came out of that experience was not anger, but forgiveness. And watching him build Reconciliation Council in South Africa, taught me a lot about that. And obviously I've been inspired by Hillary Clinton, and whether you like her or dislike her or agree with her politics or don't agree with her politics, I think there's lots to admire about her strength, her discipline, and her resiliency in the face of everything that she's endured in her life. And so she's also been an inspiration to me as well.
You've already answered my question, but if you can meet one person alive on the planet right now that you find fascinating, who would that be?
Oh, boy. There's so many. If they have to be alive?
Ghosts.
It would be Steve Jobs without question. If I had to pick any one person, it would be Steve Jobs without a doubt. We lost him way too soon. Maybe Jim Henson too.
What would be? Well, yeah, exactly. What would you want to know?
Well, I just want to talk with Steve Jobs about the way he thinks, because I picked Apple stock when I was in 8th grade. They were teaching us about the stock market, and I won my 8th grade stock picking competition in the 80s by picking Apple. This was before computers were everywhere. And I've always seen him as sort of a Pied Piper for my generation. He was young, right? He broke all the mold. He wasn't wearing a suit every day. He really was thinking differently about the way the world could be. And I think getting his perspective on current events, on the way where technology is going, we're in such a strange place right now in technology. we don't have, we're, especially with AI, I would love to hear the way he thinks about AI and where his mind was headed. And just in general, because he was so engaged in the world well beyond technology. He took calligraphy classes in college, and he thought about art and music. And so I think it would just be a fascinating conversation.
With someone like Steve, there's a lot of motivation. There was a lot of gumption for him to do what he did. What is that for you every day that motivates you to wake up, to do the work that you do, to affect as many people as you do? What is that collective gas in your tank?
Well, it's still, wanting to build a better life for myself and my family. I always like to say I got to the Valley early, but not early enough. So I don't think there's anything wrong with having a financial motivation, but I also want to do it right. I see so many, I sort of joke that a lot of what I do is to clean up unicorn poop, meaning there's a lot of stuff that goes on here in the Valley that I quietly clean up. And I get frustrated when I see how bad marketing can be, and I really appreciate the opportunity to sort of make things right and to do marketing well and to be sort of a credit to my profession and not a detriment. So finding and solving problems is really sort of the intellectual juice. It's like, ooh, why is traffic down, or why is conversion rate down, and sort of solving that mystery and fixing it and watching the numbers go up and to the right is just, it's a blast.
When you look back on your career, there's all these periods that kind of ebb and flow, and sometimes there's big chunks of growth, things that you have to go through. What's that period been like for you in your career, where you really grew, whether it was magnanimous and hard, bitter, sweet, good, triumphant? What was that period for you?
Well, it's actually been pretty recent, so we'll see how much perspective I have and how well this ages, as the kids say. I recently, in 2022, as we were coming out of pandemic and I saw the market slowing down, I started to get anxious about the business. And then I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I spent 2 years with no revenue coming into the company. It is a completely different company than it was 3 years ago. 3 years ago, we were $1.5 million in revenue, 20 employees. Now it's just me and a few contractors. And I definitely went through sort of a death of the ego, like how do you define yourself? So that was part of it, because I'd gone to business school and been driven. I was very proud of the fact 95% of women-owned businesses never cross the $1 million threshold. And, I was very proud of the work I'd put in, and it felt like very quickly it had unraveled. But at the same time, I was lucky to catch my cancer early, in the sense that, I got a glimpse of, how little a lot of what I do matters in the grand scheme of things. I got a chance to sort of like reset my health, to reset my relationships, to think hard about who I want to be, and to reset my goals. And so I can't say it was easy. I don't think growth is easy in any way, shape, or form. And, I don't know. I sort of, I will let other people decide what the adjectives are. I just think you just keep going. I think is the phrase I say. It's like one day at a time, and you just keep going. You don't stop. And that's, a lesson I learned just even watching my mother, who is 75, total knee replacement, and, didn't want me to do anything for her, because it was like, if I let you do things for me, then I will stop. And if I stop, I'm going to, get old. And it's like, you keep going. You just keep pushing. And that, I think, it sort of said, yeah, I'm resilient and I'm tough, and we just keep going.
Green tonight, you ran into the 18-year-old version of you, and you could give that newly graduated from high school version of you a piece of advice based on the life you've lived, the wisdom you've gained. What advice would you give that young version of you?
Besides buying Apple stock and Yahoo stock and Microsoft, I would say that it's like the old saying, it's going to get better. Meaning you're going to go through some hard times. Probably, maybe, have more confidence in yourself and what you know. I think I was afraid to study some hard subjects because they seemed hard. I didn't have really the support I needed to study STEM. And, I think I was always fascinated by technology, taught myself to program and code at the age, in basic when I was in middle school. But when I got to college and tried to study computer science, we just weren't ready yet. We didn't have compilers. We didn't have the things that I probably could have used to take myself there. And so I think maybe to take more risks and to to have more faith in myself and to be more confident in what I thought was right.
If you could go back in history, we get off the phone here, and you could go back in history and see one event with your own eyes, where would you go?
Wow, that's a good question. I have to think about that. One event through history. Well, facetiously, it would be great to see the beginning of time. I mean, certainly, understanding where life comes from and where we go when we die would be amazing. But in a more practical sense, if I have to be more practical, I think I'd want to see, I'm thinking about art for some reason. I think, and actually what I would like to see is either Waiting for Godot on Broadway when it first came out, or something like, one of the great sort of like plays in the 50s and 60s, like one of those great things that those actors are gone now and those experiences are gone. So now that I think about it, I think that's what it would be amazing to go see, like the original Waiting for Godot on Broadway. That would have been really cool. Or the original, Sweeney Todd, or any of the great sort of, musicals that came, and to be part of that sort of world when it was actually happening would have been cool.
End of the day, of everything that you've done and accomplished in your life, what are you the proudest of?
Oh, wow, that's tough. And it doesn't mean, and I don't mean it like, wow, there's a lot I'm proud of. Like, it's more like I still struggle with confidence and self-esteem. So bragging about myself is not easy. So that's what I mean when I say this is a hard question. I think it would probably be, building my business, but not just that, but keeping it going in the face of cancer. I mean, for 2 years without revenue, it was tough. It was a grind, and it was a hit to my confidence and my belief in sort of who I was and what I could do, and sort of, I think right now that's where I'm at, is just continuing, keeping this business going, and finding a way to just stay alive and to be gritty, is, kind of a testament to the way I was raised and to do it without losing my soul. I think it's easy to make $1 million if all you want to do is make $1 million. But I think, the fact that when I had cancer, literally dozens of people helped me in so many different ways. And it really made me appreciate the value of love and to see how much good there was around me. I'm very much an independent person. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Don't ask for help. And when I did ask for help, there were so many people there for me. So I think having been able to do what I've done, but also keep my humanity and to have people around me that were there for me when I needed them, I think is, are things I'm very proud of.
At the end of the day, everyone out there has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, colleagues, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I often call myself, I'm just like the little engine that could. I'm not an engineer. Here I am out in Silicon Valley where engineers run the show. And I'm not an engineer, but I'm somebody that engineers turn to for counsel and guidance. And I'm really, and I'm still here over 20 years later. I have made a career and survived out here. And marketers don't get aqua hired, we get aqua fired. It's pretty brutal. And so just being the little engine that could, and is sort of how I think of myself. I think I can.
If anyone out there wants to reach out, learn more about what you're doing, any other good business, where's the best place to go?
You should definitely come to fiddleheadhq.com. I also try to keep a profile on LinkedIn where I'm sharing sort of, tips on, how to be better at marketing, without all of the hype, how to understand AI, how to be productive. I also have ADHD, and I've learned how to sort of manage that, work with it as an entrepreneur. So I like to talk about that as well, or just send me an email, Melinda@fiddleheadhq.com.
Thank you so much for your story, for your time, and best of luck with everything. I appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. Our esteemed theme music was composed and produced by the great E.E. Pointer of Kansas City's River Cow Orchestra. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.